Tonight, Ukraine's president says it's time to make things right. Volodymyr Zelenskyy expresses regret about the White House clash with Donald Trump and offers an olive branch. Hours earlier, the US president froze military aid to Ukraine after days of open hostility with Zelenskyy. Away from the battlefield, a trade war, President Trump's long-threatened tariffs take effect against Mexico and Canada.
Even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Also tonight, a special report from Bangladesh.
Save me from this danger.
Save me from this danger.
Yeah.
Shining a light on what's been described as a house of horrors, the survivors who say they were tortured in secret prisons. 6 months after ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled the country, the caretaker leader tells us how he's fighting to get her back.
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that, because all the evidences are here.
Hello, good evening. Donald Trump is preparing to offer a divided US and wider world an account of his turbulent first weeks in office and what he's planning next during a joint session of Congress in the coming hours. Governments have spent the day digesting last night's shock announcement when the US president ordered a halt to American military assistance to Ukraine. Well, that appeared to spur Ukraine's president into action, saying he regretted last Friday's Oval Office clash with President Trump and offering a quick return to the negotiating table. Financial markets, meanwhile, went into a tailspin after President Trump's declaration of a trade war against Mexico, Canada and China drew immediate retaliation from all three. So lots to pick through then. Let's go live to our US correspondent, David Blevins. And David, it feels like we've been watching weeks of Trump-induced turmoil and the last 24 hours most acutely with massive tariffs on America's nearest neighbours, vital military aid to Ukraine pulled, and tonight his chance to explain all to Congress and to the American people.
That's right, Anna. There is no State of the Union address following an inauguration, but there is an address to Congress. It is effectively Donald Trump's opportunity to tell members of the House and Senate what a good job he's doing. Expect to hear much about a reduction in immigration. Expect to hear much about how much they're saving because of cuts to federal government, the work being done by Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency. And expect to hear the President tell us that he's committed to tariffs, regardless of what Canada, Mexico, China or anyone else has to say. But his audience will hang on every word when it comes to the issue of Ukraine. What indeed a tumultuous 5 days it has been in the politics of the United States. It's hard to believe it was just last Friday we witnessed that jaw-dropping exchange, that showdown here in the West Wing between President Zelenskyy, President Trump and Vice President Vance. The tension escalated to the extent where yesterday we know the President suspended military aid to Ukraine, a decision with far-reaching implications both in terms of security and politics. And then today we had an effective climb down by President Zelenskyy using the word regret, something people around Donald Trump said he needed to do, acknowledging that the deal on minerals may move them close to security guarantees, and also for the very first time setting out the terms of a potential ceasefire. That is a game changer, and things are moving very fast here now. We understand Donald Trump wants this minerals deal signed tonight so that he can talk about that during his speech. But even if he showcases that as a great diplomatic achievement, it will do nothing to ease concerns around the world about what has clearly been a dramatic shift in US foreign policy, the most dramatic shift arguably in 8 decades. The United States moving closer to Russia, further away from the European Union and other old allies.
David, it has been truly extraordinary to witness, and we'll certainly keep an eye on any movement on that minerals deal. That possibility, as you said, still there. So how much then of a hole is the US creating in Ukraine's battlefield armoury, and can Europe fill it? Well, since the start of the war, America has put up heavy weapons, military equipment and portable defence systems, and produced ammunition in much larger quantities than other allies. And it's far outpaced everyone in supplying artillery like howitzers, for example, as well as powerful rocket systems and armoured personnel carriers. In money terms, the US provided 42.6 billion euros in aid to Ukraine last year, about 8 billion more than the EU. So without American money, that leaves a big black hole. From Kyiv, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has this report.
Ukrainian troops on the front line with American-supplied weapons. Vital support to combat Russia's war. It's why a decision by Donald Trump to pause all military aid following a bust-up with Ukraine's president has sent shockwaves across the country. And perhaps prompted Volodymyr Zelenskyy to offer an olive branch.
We seek constructive cooperation, a relationship built on trust. What's happened at the White House instead of our planned negotiations is regrettable, but we must find the strength to move forward.
The president also used a post on social media to say, "We're ready to work fast to end the war, and the first stages could be the release of prisoners and a truce in the sky, a ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure, and a truce in the sea immediately if Russia will do the same." Ukraine's Prime Minister hoping diplomacy will diffuse the drama, with expectations growing that Ukraine and the US will sign a key minerals deal.
We are ready to sign the prepared agreement on the establishment of the investment fund in order to begin cooperation with the United States on a fully pragmatic and economic basis. This agreement has been approved by the government of Ukraine.
The American Vice President also sounding optimistic.
I think the president is still committed to the mineral deal. I think we've heard some positive things, but not yet, of course, the signature from our friends in Ukraine.
In Russia, there was enthusiasm for any stopping of US military support for Ukraine. Unclear, though, how Moscow will react to signs Kyiv and Washington might be mending ties. Ukraine's government clearly believes it can still make a deal with Donald Trump, switch back on that military support and go some way towards rebuilding ties. But trust has fundamentally broken down amongst ordinary people who question whether America is still on their side.
Right now, it feels like we are stopped in our back, and yep, I think it's some kind of tragedy.
Overall situation is disturbing because, well, the most disturbing thing is that it sounds very unfair because, you know, we are victims.
Yet still standing strong, despite this new era of even greater uncertainty. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
So what kinds of conversations then are going on in the White House right now about Ukraine? Donald Trump famously fell out with his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, but he is still a prominent figure in right-wing politics in America. Well, speaking to my colleague Ali Fortescue a little earlier, he described President Zelenskyy as a punk and a crook and said there should be no deals at all.
I think people to the right of President Trump and people around President Trump, maybe not inside the White House, are strongly advocating absolutely no security guarantee, no minerals deal. Call the bluff of the EU, call the bluff of the United Kingdom, call the bluff of Macron. Let you guys step up, which you haven't to date, and actually do your fair share, if you want to, in Ukraine. We've had it. We're done with it. There's too much blood has been spilled, too much destruction. We called this from the very beginning. Exactly what's going to happen. It's time now to cut our losses.
Well, the Ukrainian opposition MP and leader of the Holos political party, Kira Rudik, joins me now. Very good to see you here. These are difficult times for Ukraine, certainly. The US is not just wavering, it is acting. Voices like Steve Bannon's possibly in President Trump's ear. How nervous do you feel right now about how this could go?
Oh, Anna, thank you so much for having me. Of course, we are all nervous because humans' lives are at stake, right? And it started at least 2 weeks ago when President Trump started saying that Ukraine has started the war, and then that President Zelenskyy is dictator, etc. Then he took something of that back. But the truth is, right now, situation is very unstable, and we are really hopeful that our European allies will step up. J.D. Vance was pretty clear that Europe's security would be Europe's responsibility. And so we really hope that this message landed in the right way, because the truth is, European continent is indeed our responsibility, and we are looking forward to figuring out some really good strategic plan on how to move forward, because we see that the United States is clearly unpredictable, and for all of us to make sure that the continent is secure, we'll have to rely on ourselves a lot.
Well, the Reuters news agency, quoting multiple unnamed sources, suggests that President Trump wants that minerals deal to go ahead. He wants to be able to announce it, speaking to Congress overnight UK time tonight. Are you now desperate for that deal to go ahead? And should that always have been seized by President Zelenskyy?
So I think President Zelenskyy was ready to sign this deal during his previous visit to the White House, right? I don't think there were any issues with it, because it's really a framework deal more like a memorandum that President will sign, because the details of the deal will still have to be ratified by Ukrainian parliament. It will take like long time with the negotiations of how to make many changes to the complicated bills for it to actually work. But I think if Donald Trump needs to share the win and share it with US citizens, he will be able to do that, saying, well, Ukraine will pay back. But there are two questions, Anna. The first is why does President Trump is taking money from Ukraine and not from Russia, or seizing Russian assets and using them for his sake and for sake of creating additional defense for Ukraine? And the second question that we never heard an answer to is, what are the security guarantees? How do we make sure, like any of us, that Russia would not attack us again? And if we come back to this back and forth in the White House, this is what President Zelenskyy was asking. He said, like, well, how do we know that it would work? It didn't work before.
America's making it clear it does not want to give you security guarantees.
But then, like,
it does not want to be involved in Ukraine. But then it effectively wants this over. You know, that's what they're saying.
But how can you make it over? Like, how can you stop it? And we were trying. If we stop fighting, then Ukraine fails, and then Russia will take over. And if Russia stops fighting, then the war will be over.
Well, the point being, as you said, it's down to Europe to step in. Are you confident that Europe has the money, the armaments, the ammunition to step in and do what America has been doing for Ukraine? Because production is not there on specific equipment that you will need to continue fighting.
So there is not a simple answer, right? And it will take time. But apparently Europe will have to do this. And I think, and again, the question is, maybe now is a time when European leaders will take a strong stance and confiscate $300 billion of Russian money that are right now in Belgium, Euroclear, sitting there, waiting for political will. And right now is a very good time for this political will to be executed on, right? We know that it will be painful to replace the US support with potential Europe support. We know that. But at some point, I think we may not have a choice, right?
Yeah. How do you feel right now about President Trump and those who surround him, and how some people regard he is rewarding Russia for their aggression? How do you feel about that?
I think I think Donald Trump is operating under very dangerous illusion that you can play around with Putin and then you can win over him. We have not seen this happening in the past, and we have seen that Putin will play his part of the game and he will try to fool really powerful people, and he was doing that before, and he was pretty successful in that. So I hope that President Trump either has a plan that we are not aware of or can find a better way to pressure Russia than he seemed to have right now.
Kira Rudik, Ukrainian MP, we really appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Anna.
Well, now to the lines drawn in President Trump's trade war against America's three biggest trading partners, Mexico, Canada and China. Goods coming over the border from the United States' northern and southern neighbours now attract 25% tariffs, while levies on Chinese goods doubled to 20%. All three are retaliating, sending shudders through world markets. And the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had this to say to the US President.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see.
So how can we understand these tariffs and their implications using, say, a single engine part? Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, explains.
Why are tariffs such a big deal? Let me give you a sense of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a component as it's manufactured. Actually, it's a component that goes into a car, but it's a component of a component because it's a piston that goes inside an engine in a car that's made in North America. And right now, here's the journey it takes. It starts off here in Michigan. So in Michigan is where the raw aluminium that's going to become part of that piston is then shipped across the border, that's key here, across the border into Ontario. So in Ontario, it's cast into a piston and then it goes back to Michigan again, OK? And at that point, when it's in Michigan, it needs to go down to Mexico because it needs to be finished, and it's finished in a factory in Mexico. So it goes all the way down there, across the border, into Mexico. But the journey's not over yet because at that point, it needs to go back across into Wisconsin and then Michigan, where it's assembled. It's assembled into an engine. And at that point, from Michigan, it goes again across the border into Ontario. And that is where it basically becomes part of a car. So it's assembled into the car, and the car at that point is basically a finished product, and that's shipped over to the US. It's one example. Deep breath here. But if you've kind of totted this up, you might have come to the conclusion that, look, we're talking about 6 border crossings of that component. And right now, those border crossings in and out of the US are tariff-free, OK? And this is a free trade zone. If you're imposing tariffs on all of those border crossings, that will tot up. It will be a very big deal indeed because it raises the cost. And that is a really big deal when it comes in particular to automotives. These bars are basically just showing you how much of each different category of import into the US is coming from Mexico, from Canada, from China, of course, which are the affected countries here. And with automotives, you're talking about over 50%. Over 50% of all the vehicle imports, but also the components as well, come from these places. A lot of it from Mexico. You can see the green there. Look at energy. Over 60, well, it's actually around 60% is from these areas, imports, most of that from Canada. And overall, you're talking about 40% of all imports. So it's an enormous, enormous amount of imports. Imagine Brexit in the UK. So it's similar. You've got a free trade zone. We never actually impose tariffs. Tariffs here on any of these goods are going to push up prices. And of course, the extent to which they get pushed up depends on precisely how long these tariffs are in place for and how severe they are. This is showing you historically, so going back to the 1800s, just how high the average tariff rate was in the US. The famous example here, the 1930s Smoot-Hawley famous set of tariffs. Some say they contributed to the Great Depression. That was really high. What we're talking about here, it's not quite as high as that, but certainly the highest since the 1940s. So really historic levels. And the upshot of all of that is, as well as it meaning higher inflation, because the cost of goods potentially go up, it means less activity. And this is a kind of measure of just how much activity there is in the economy in recent years. And the higher this line is, the more activity there is. Look at this. Just recently, in the last few days, the expectation is that the US economy is shrinking by 2.8% in the first quarter. A lot of people will look at that and say, listen, this is part of the implication of tariffs, but also broader concern about US economic policy.
Ed Conway explaining there the impact of those enormous tariffs which came in overnight. Well, you're watching The World with me, Anna Botting. Still to come, the first group of sick and injured children from Gaza arrive in Jordan for medical care.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problems. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Arab leaders meeting in Cairo have tonight endorsed a counter-proposal to Donald Trump's call for Palestinians to be moved out of Gaza. The Egyptian reconstruction plan would cost an estimated $53 billion, and Palestinians would stay rather than being resettled in neighbouring countries. It is, of course, in sharp contrast to what President Trump has suggested, which includes redeveloping the territory into what he described as a Riviera. Well, meanwhile, the first group of sick and injured children to be evacuated from Gaza have arrived in Jordan. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who travelled with them, reports now from the capital, Amman.
The convoy crossed the border into Jordan late in the afternoon. The drive from Gaza had taken them through Israel, a country they've been at war with for almost a year and a half. Most of them have been travelling constantly, fleeing the fighting. But this, at last, was a journey to safety. 29 Gazan children and some of their families were evacuated in this first wave, many of them amputees needing specialist medical care.
Thank God we chose to come here so that my daughter can get treatment. Thank you and God bless you. My daughter has a cyst on the brain which causes her fits and she passes out.
The hospitals in Gaza have been bombed and mostly destroyed. They're barely functioning now.
They didn't get that in Gaza because there is no possibility to get that there. There is no hospitals. That means we accept they here to get the medical assistance here.
Naveen is 6 months old, born during the war with a heart defect. She is dangerously underweight too. They've lost their home and have been living in a tent. Her chances of survival, if she had stayed in Gaza, were not good.
It was difficult in Gaza. There was no treatment I could get for her. She was losing weight. She's now 6 months old and she hasn't put on even 1 kilogram in the last 6 months. And in the tents, my daughter got ill. She's suffering a lot.
Jordan has told President Trump that they don't support the forced eviction of Palestinians from Gaza, but they will take 2,000 sick children and their families for treatment.
So what happens now is they'll be taken to hospital in Amman for specialist medical treatment. Now, the Jordanians have been very clear. You know, this is a temporary evacuation. They will be free to go back to Gaza once they've had that medical care. This is not the permanent forced evacuation that Donald Trump was proposing. But they've all left family members behind in Gaza to come here, and they've left Gaza and a ceasefire that is hanging by a thread.
It's the first time Enes and her family have ever been out of Gaza. This is all they've arrived with, a few plastic bags of clothes. She's left behind everything to save her daughter. Tonight, Naveen is undergoing tests to see what surgery she might need. But she now has a chance of living. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Amman.
This is The World with me, Anna Botting. Coming up next, a special report, Bangladesh's underground prisons and those who say they were tortured.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, now to what are described as torture chambers, hidden cells where Bangladesh's former government allegedly sent detainees to break them mentally and physically. Well, that government and the Prime Minister who led it, Sheikh Hasina, were toppled last August. Her downfall gathered pace a month earlier when students protested against job quotas, seen as a corrupt system to dole out plum government jobs. Well, the ferocity of the responding crackdown and the deaths of protesters resulted in spiralling violence. Soon, what began as student protests had morphed into a mass anti-government movement which couldn't be crushed despite mounting fatalities amongst demonstrators. Well, Sheikh Hasina finally quit, fled to India as the crowds closed in. A caretaker government took over and Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal issued an arrest warrant for Hasina, accusing her of overseeing hundreds of secret prisons. She denies any wrongdoing. Well, our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has been shown those alleged torture chambers. Cordelia joins us now. You've seen them and you've heard testimony, Cordelia. So what was your sense then when you were first taken there?
Well, it's a very eerie, very striking experience. Bangladesh is only just beginning to learn the full extent of these secret detention centres. And they are not in the middle of nowhere. They are in places like this, Dhaka, the capital. The one we went to was in a barracks, home to Rapid Action Battalion. That's a counter-terrorism force. And as we walk in, you see a cafeteria, an entertainment room. But towards the back then, these secret cells which they opened to us, only just enough room to lie down in, certainly no beds. These are stark, they are dark. Some areas appear to have been painted over, but these were very intense places, and the sites, it's alleged, of much torture too. To see them up close truly is quite shocking, and to hear the testimony of survivors is something that will certainly stay with many.
For years, dark, dangerous currents raged beneath the surface in Bangladesh. Rivers, a final resting place for sordid secrets, hiding stories of alleged state-led brutality, dumping grounds for political captives, the victims of a secret network of underground prisons we will take you to the very heart of, where it's claimed targets face torture and death.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped, their bodies tied to cement bags to make them sink, and their families never told what had happened to them.
These are some of the faces of the many still missing, abducted from streets and homes. A special commission set up to investigate enforced disappearances now already has 1,700 complaints. Nabila Idris thinks there could be more than 3,500 victims, but her work is very complex.
These large waterways provided an excellent source of body disposal, right? And this is why it's proving very difficult for any forensic evidence to be established, because it doesn't exist, it's all in there. People would be shot beside bridges, bodies would be thrown over, their bellies would be slit, and cement or bricks would be pushed inside so they'd be weighed down.
You've got an enormous caseload on your hands. Are you confident that you already have a compelling case of state-backed torture?
Absolutely. We got that within the first 2-3 months.
Bangladesh's former leader, Sheikh Hasina, now in exile in India, is accused of directly ordering enforced disappearances, which she denies. She framed her crackdown as a war on terror. But we're going to show you the brutal reality of it for the first time.
This is one of the cells.
Secret torture cells where her opponents were held. Some spent years blindfolded in windowless rooms. Now prosecutors are building a case for crimes against humanity.
Save me from this danger.
Save me from this danger.
Yeah.
Most were critics of the government, held here by Rapid Action Battalion, an elite counter-terrorism force described by human rights observers as an in-house death squad.
You get a really powerful sense here of just how claustrophobic it must have felt. People in total darkness and isolation, spending most of their days locked in rooms with no light.
Lurking behind a door is the grim legacy of interrogation, built to torture the mind and body. It's alleged detainees were strapped into this chair and spun at high speed. Others hung from the ceiling or shackled. In this room, we find bags of banned drugs, counterfeit money, even explosives. Prosecutors say it's fake evidence planted on detainees to justify keeping them here. And this is just one of many sites now being uncovered across the country.
So far we have identified there are about 800 or 700 to 800 detention centers they have developed.
Do you allege that Sheikh Hasina had knowledge and involvement in these forced disappearances?
We have interviewed some of the perpetrators, the commanders of the different discipline forces, and they have stated that they did everything as per the order of the Prime Minister. What Hasina did is nothing but a crimes against humanity. And that's why we will prove it in the courtroom.
This is the first secret jail to be exposed. It was codenamed House of Mirrors, hidden in a military compound. Exhaust fans roared constantly. The aim? To send prisoners into madness. Michael Chakma recently made it out. The indigenous rights activist was freed into a forest, blindfolded, glimpsing sunlight for the first time since 2019.
Were you scared for your life?
Yeah, I never thought that I could come out from that place. It was 5 years, 4 months. 4 months. I couldn't see any light and anything.
No sunlight for more than 5 years?
Yeah, more than 5 years, no sunlight.
His family had already held a funeral for him, but suddenly he could see a future.
Then after untie my eyes, then I saw the world again after 4 months.
Overwhelming, but still, he was fearful.
I always thought that someone must be waiting for me.
His case has given hope and relief, but it's now clear there were many House of Mirrors.
All these detention centers were justified as, like being part of Sheikh Hasina's war against terrorism. I mean, we cannot deny that there are some terrorist groups in Bangladesh, but what now is becoming clearer is that a large part of Sheikh Hasina's war against terrorism, which was supported by Brits and Americans and Europeans, that was fake. I mean, many of the cases were simply trumped up.
Hundreds of families have spent years watching doors, making beds, preparing for elusive reunions. Campaigners are now increasingly vocal.
Humanly not possible to pass through this kind of trauma every day. And kids, these wives, we say them half widows, 12 years, they don't know the whereabouts of their husband.
Sanjida has her own trauma. Her brother, Shahjul, a member of Hasina's rival party, disappeared in 2013.
Sheikh Hasina then is ousted, and yet you're still waiting. How challenging has this long wait for news been for you?
If he's not alive, then where they have thrown him, I don't know that place, to go and pray. So it is heavier for us, heavier for each of us who lost their family members.
You need a place to mourn.
It is an excruciating limbo for the whole family.
And your mother looks for him every night?
She prays and then she opens the gate and then she looks for if anyone throws anyone in front of the gate.
This is all that's left of Sheikh Hasina's family home, destroyed by protesters. There is an arrest warrant out for the ex-leader, but Hasina denies the accusations against her and claims she's being politically persecuted. Getting her in front of a court will be a very tall order.
You've got the justice and security sectors here in Bangladesh that desperately need to be reformed. If they are not, then this is a country that could easily slide into a cycle of repression. Historically, you have two parties here that have both been accused of involvement in enforced disappearances. And so what you have is an interim government that doesn't have long in power, that needs to be seen to deliver justice fairly as well as swiftly. But there are mounting cases. There are also many in the country still here that are accused of being the perpetrators, and people want to see them arrested. It is an incredibly challenging moment for the interim leader, Mohammed Yunus.
Cordelia, live there in Dhaka. Thank you very much indeed. Well, coming up, we will hear how Bangladesh's caretaker leader plans to pursue the ousted Prime Minister and others to face trial.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over 50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Maitai village on the front line.
Firing to civilians and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
It's a Premier League weekend on NBC and Peacock. March 8, top four hopefuls, Aston Villa. Visit Brentford.
Oh, wow!
Then March 9th, it's a blockbuster battle. Arsenal.
That's done it! Just what Arsenal needed.
Visit bitter rivals, Manchester United. The Premier League weekend is on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
Welcome back to The World. Now, just days after Bangladesh's ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled the country last year, a Nobel laureate was sworn in as interim leader. Muhammad Yunus was a favourite among those who brought down Hasina, and his cabinet includes student protest leaders. Well, he sat down with Cordelia Lynch and explained how he wants to bring Hasina to trial.
6 months ago, Sheikh Hasina, the former leader of Bangladesh, was ousted from power. She is accused of overseeing a state-run system of secret detention centres where people were held, many tortured, some killed. She's now in exile in India. Just how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that, because all the evidences are here. But she's not physically present in Bangladesh. So the question is, can we make her present in Bangladesh? That depends on India and also international law guiding all this system, how it works. So we'll be already asked India to hand over Hasina to Bangladesh to face the trial. So the question of trial is not if it will be happening in absentia or in her presence. It will be taking place, not only her, and all the people who were associated with her family members, her clans, her associates, and all the oligarchs, people who promoted her, supported her, made her the way she is.
Do you believe she was an architect of a secret system that tortured its victims? And are you surprised by how many of these sites appear to have been uncovered now?
Horror stories are usually entertaining things for people. So this is a real thing. And one person and her whole administration dedicated to that, doing that every day. I don't think history ever had that kind of person. You hear about oppressive leaders and so on, not of the kind that Hasina stood up.
You've asked India, made clear you want her back. Have you had any official response yet?
I would say no, no official response, but we are waiting for that response.
Are you hopeful?
I hope so, if the law requires that. I mean, it's a legal issue. If legally they are required to send her to Bangladesh, I think it's international law will guide that decision.
Are you having tough conversations with New Delhi?
We have sent formal letters, so not conversations, but formal letters to make sure that it's understood.
You recently, personally, visited Ainaka, the House of Mirrors, this infamous, ultimate torture chamber that was hidden from the public for so long. Were you shocked by what you saw?
Shock will be a very mild word in a situation like that, when you see things and you've been hearing about it, you've met those people who suffered through those most heinous thing you can imagine a human being can do to another human being. It's just the ugliest thing that you can see, you can feel, you can observe.
Investigators do now say there are hundreds of sites like the House of Mirrors across the country. The families of the disappeared, some are desperate to get inside these locations. Why haven't they been able to get access yet?
This is within the police territory or army territory, so they have not opened it to the public yet because this will create a bad response from the army and so on. Those kind of fear that the public gets into the cantonment area where they live, the army people live. So they are restricting those areas, but we have decided to make it a museum so that public can come in.
There are arrest warrants for Sheikh Hasina and her aides, but she's in exile. Others have fled the country, and there are some of the alleged perpetrators still working in the system. What's the delay in those arrests for those responsible?
Everybody was involved in it. The whole government was involved in it. So you cannot distinguish who is really enthusiastically doing it, really doing it under orders, not quite supportive, but carrying out those kind of things. So those are the things which are taking time.
In July and August, there were deadly protests. The UN now says as many as 1,400 people were killed in those days before Sheikh Hasina fled. Will the families of the victims see justice in your administration?
We are trying. We cannot guarantee because we are a short-lived government because legal process is very slow. So we cannot push it either. So we are identifying, we're letting them go through the process. Some will get punished, some will still be under the process, some will still be untraceable, trying to find out where that person is, what happened to that person, and so on. So I would say we'll do our best to do as many as possible during our time, but many of them will be in progress in the situation. They didn't get the punishment yet, but they're going through the process.
Tulip Siddiq was Britain's former anti-corruption minister, but she recently resigned after growing pressure over an anti-corruption probe here in Bangladesh, where she's being investigated. Do you think she should be extradited?
If she's proven, and again, there's a legal issue. If she still has a Bangladeshi passport, I guess she doesn't have a Bangladeshi passport, she will be UK citizenship. So whether we can bring back a UK citizen for trial in Bangladesh. And so those are issues I'm not very clear about.
Do you think, though, that this is a serious case that does warrant further investigation?
Oh, yes. Our Anti-Corruption Commission is taking it very seriously. She has so many wealth left behind here. And they will check everything and see how she should be made responsible.
A huge issue for you is the Rohingya refugee crisis. There's been talk of establishing a humanitarian corridor from Bangladesh to Myanmar to enable the repatriation of Rohingya back to their home. Are you in talks with rebels in Myanmar to make this happen?
We have contacts with them because there's a new inflow of Rohingyas coming to Bangladesh. So we had to deal with their army on the border to allow them to easy or systematic way of entering, because we need to have their biometrics done so that they don't disappear within the country. And one thing that we started discussing with the international organizations, can you help them to keep them on the other side? Do everything that you do on this side, but it will be on the other side, so that they are not pouring into Bangladesh territory. So this is what the safe zone idea came. And we said, we'll cooperate if you want to take any resources to take care of them.
Are you worried about the violence in the camps?
Oh, there's lots of violence, lots of drugs, lots of paramilitary activities inside the camps. So those kind of things. It's not an easy thing. This tension will not disappear.
Bangladesh's interim leader Muhammad Yunus speaking there to Cordelia Lynch. Well, Professor Yunus mentioned the allegations against Tulip Siddiq, who resigned as the UK government's anti-corruption czar after being named in those anti-corruption probes in Bangladesh. She is the niece of Sheikh Hasina, the ousted Bangladeshi Prime Minister. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has more details.
We've also found out that anti-corruption investigators based here in the UK at the National Crime Agency could get involved. They're looking at how they can assist the Bangladeshi authorities as they look into allegations of grand corruption within the country's former government. Tulip Siddiq's team maintain she's completely innocent and say she hasn't even been contacted by the authorities in Bangladesh. Properties she's lived in here do have links to the former Bangladeshi regime, though. So while she was cleared by the Prime Minister's ethics advisor earlier this year, any further inquiries could turn up awkward revelations.
Rob Powell reporting there. Well, that is it for The World Tonight. All eyes, of course, on Donald Trump's address to Congress as America's neighbours are left reeling at the end of free trade and Ukraine stunned by the end of the weapons flow in their battle against Russia. Possible movement on both stories, so do stay with us. I'll be back in a moment with Sky News at 10. See you shortly.